Now, the Democratic Nursing Organization of South Africa is calling on Gauteng Premier David Makhura to vacate his position until the SIU investigation into PPE tender corruption in Gauteng is complete. For more on this, I'm joined by DENOSA Gauteng Chairperson, Simphiwe Gada. Simphiwe, good evening and thank you for joining us here on the newsfeed late night. Now, Gauteng province is under investigation by the SIU following, of course, what they believe is questionable expenditure on COVID-19 items. The scale of these allegations has eroded public confidence in this particular administration. You believe that the Premier should himself be held accountable?
Well, thank you, Thabo. Thank you for having us. I think you'll agree with me that the Premier has been spared for a long time. When Life Esidimeni happened, he never took any responsibility. When the fire at the Bank of Lisbon happened, he never took any responsibility. And we must tell you, even when this PPE saga happened, it is not that the Department of Health alone was presiding over this. The Premier's office was presiding over this. You'll recall that PPE, there was a provincial command center which was led by Makhura's office. And another piece of interesting information that we must bring to the fore is the fact that the Premier is playing politics because he must confirm and come out and confirm that he had received the resignation, in fact, from the HOD of Health before announcing, that he's suspending him. So is also playing politics there. So I'm going to
come back to the suspension of the MEC. I just want to stay with this issue of the Premier being held accountable. Do you believe there are things that might have happened in his name that he is aware of and should be held accountable for?
Well, the buck stops with the Premier in the province, so he cannot plead ignorance that he was not aware when these things were happening. So, I mean, the DG that works in the Premier's office was also sitting on matters of the PPE, was there. We also hear that, the name of the Premier from time to time comes up. So that is why we are saying he must step down and allow the full investigation of the SIU to take place, because we believe that his continued presence in office may compromise the investigation of the SIU. So we think that it is the only fair thing that he should consider doing. Also, being the head of government in the province, I mean, he has never taken any responsibility for anything that happens in the Department of Health, and he has always pleaded ignorance. So you can't be lead of government and then you say you didn't know what was happening in your administration. So that is why we're making this call.
Do you think the Premier has enforced the highest level of accountability when it comes to tender processes?
No, we don't think so. Because all these issues, as they were happening, I had indicated earlier that his office was involved. The DG that works in his office was doing oversight work when these issues were being processed. So the DG reports directly to the Premier. So he can't claim ignorance and say he didn't know. That is why we are saying that the Premier must not project himself as an angel. He should also subject him to the processes of the law and subject himself to be investigated. The terms of reference of investigation of the SIU should also stretch and look whether the Premier himself is not implicated.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a nutshell, you're saying the administration of David Makhura has got poor oversight and generally loopholes for exploitation, which has seen the kind of corruption we have seen in this 2.1 billion that was going to be spent on COVID-19 items.
Yes, that's what we are saying. And I think that there was a Public Service Commission report that had indicated that the office of the Premier lacked capacity. He needed to make sure that his office is capacitated. So we will be looking into that report to say, did he really implement what was recommended by the Public Service Commission? Because to us, this is an indication that he did not implement everything. Because you cannot keep limping from one scandal to the next scandal in one department. And by the way, Thabo must mention that there's another scandal that is coming, for instance, in the Department of Public Infrastructure. I mean, they must account to tell us that the field hospitals that they were building, the poor state that they are in. I mean, if you go to Barra, there's a temporary structure which was built, and the wooden flooring costed more than $1 million. And if you look at that, it's poor work. So the Premier, who was deeply involved, his office was deeply involved, has got to account. He cannot come and keep placing the blame on the officials as well as the MECs. What has he done himself as the Premier? Because at the end of the day, he's the head of government, and we think that all these scandals, he should take responsibility for them.
Now, let's go back to the SIU investigation then that has seen the MEC for Health, Dr. Bandile Masuku, being, I mean, do you call it being fired? But the Premier says, look, I will consider reappointing him once the SIU investigation has been finalized and he is clear. I mean, what do you make of that statement in itself?
Well, I think the Premier must not test our intelligence. You know, in my years of experience as a worker representatives, even our members, when they are being investigated, I've never seen a situation where when a preliminary report has been issued, you then say, I'm firing you 50%, and if the final report comes and clears you, then I will reinstate you. The Premier must make up his mind and fire Bandile Masuku if he's firing him, so that we can all move on, because our preoccupation as DENOSA, our worry is the fact that currently as things stand in the Department of Health, you've got a Department of Health that is unstable, both politically as well as administrative. You've got an acting MEC, you've got an acting HOD, you've got an acting CFO, you've got an acting Chief Director Supply Chain Management, you've got an acting DTG HR. Now, the issue of the DTG HR we can understand, because Andile Kwabin was suspended on the same day as the HOD, so there's still an investigation that is happening. The HOD resigned, so that post is vacant, and it's a critical post that must be filled. So we think that the process should begin, and they should consult with us as stakeholders to say that that is in progress. So equally with the MEC, he must make up his mind. He can't tell us that the MEC is incompetent administratively, but if he has been cleared of corruption, he's going to re-employ him. What Makhura is telling us is that he's going to employ a person who's incompetent. That is why he was saying the Premier is simply testing waters as to what will be the response when he fires Bandile. In fact, in our view, he has fired him. He's just doing it, letting him down, slowly. So, in our view, Makhura must not be a coward. He must come out and state clearly, because our interest as DENOSA is that the department has got to be stable. You agree with me that we are now on alert level 1. We are approaching the festive season. People in their social behavior has been relaxed. Their conduct has been relaxed. So we may see a second wave of COVID-19, and you'll find the Department of Health not ready. As things stand, the problem with acting people is that they are not decisive. They don't take decisions. We have a challenge whereby we'll have a shortage of PPE in the province, and that will pose a danger to the frontline workers on the ground. Yeah. But nobody will be held accountable for that, because people are acting. So that's why we're saying, let's stop acting and let's ensure that the Department of Health is stable. This is one critical department that we cannot afford for it.
Now, Simphiwe, could the Premier afford to ignore the findings of the SIU? I mean, the SIU being pushed for that particular question, are they playing political games? They say we don't investigate individuals, we investigate process. And the process revealed that the MEC didn't play his role of oversight, particularly when it comes to the PFMA and making sure that due processes were followed. Should the Premier have just ignored those findings?
No, he shouldn't have ignored the findings. That's why we are saying that the Premier should be decisive and not give us, a half-baked cake here. He must tell us, he must act. If he's firing Bandile, let him fire Bandile so that we can get a new MEC. So he must not do what he's doing, because he had already...
All right, then I think we have lost Simphiwe Gada there. Simphiwe, are you back with us? Okay, there you are. You were saying he must not do a half job. Sorry, we lost you there in communication a little bit.
Yes, I'm saying the MEC, the Premier must not do a half job. He must take a decision. I mean, he had taken the initial step, which was placing the MEC on special leave. And we're aware that the special leave was just a precautionary leave. It did not constitute a judgment or a sanction. So he has got the powers empowered by the Constitution to fire as well as to appoint. So that is why we are saying that he himself is now running at the risk of not fully exercising his powers. And what if tomorrow wake up and say the Premier is not fully exercising his powers? What must happen to him? That is why we are encouraging him. We are saying that he should be decisive. I mean, being a leader is a difficult job. You need to be decisive. And we have said to the Premier, he will not be liked by anyone, by everyone, for exercising his job. And if he wants to be loved by people, he must just sell ice cream and get out of government. But if he wants to lead the people of Gauteng, then he must take proper decisions. Yeah. Because we are stakeholders. We are not going to fold arms and watch the Department of Health collapse in front of our eyes. We have come a long way in stabilizing that department. So, and because, Thabo, let me tell you something. Yeah. You know, tomorrow when there's no medication in the hospitals, when there are no PPEs in the hospital, do you know who's going to be blamed? It's the nurses and the doctors.
Right.
They will not know that it's caused by the instability in governance. So that is what we're against.
So what is your next step of action as far as the position of the Premier is concerned and all these issues that you are raising about him being decisive?
Well, we have written a letter to him today as instructed by the PEC, seeking audience. We are going to say these things that we are saying in the public domain to him. So these things that we are raising are not personal. We are simply communicating the feeling of frontline workers. Because frontline workers want to work in a stable environment. That's what we want to achieve. So we'll tell him that, Premier, please be decisive and come out clearly. Don't tiptoe. You must stop tiptoeing. That's what we are saying.